Welcome to Supplemental and welcome to 2021. This is my more loosely scripted show, something halfway between a podcast and a vlog. Today I want to talk about a criticism which I've seen levied at Star Trek Discovery Season 3 in particular. That is that the overall story for the season is a rip-off of the sci-fi show Andromeda. Now, just in case you haven't seen Disco Season 3 or Andromeda, here's a quick breakdown of both shows. Andromeda. It takes place in the far future. Civilizations across 3 different galaxies are united in the system's Commonwealth, but when one of the member species revolts, the Commonwealth collapses. Now, when Dylan Hunt, captain of the Andromeda Ascendant, emerges from being trapped in a black hole, perfectly preserved over centuries due to time dilation, he joins a ragtag group in order to rebuild the Commonwealth. Now in Discovery Season 3, Michael Burnham and the USS Discovery jump 900 years into the future and discover that the United Federation of Planets has been weakened and scattered thanks to a mysterious disaster. Thus they rejoin with what's left of the Federation and go off to try and help rebuild the Federation. Now, these two premises are quite similar, but only in general, broad terms. There's a lot of important differences between the two, although the general setup is the same. Now, many have accused Kurtzman of being unoriginal and saying he ripped off Andromeda. Now, this is a bit of a bad faith argument which holds most media to a frankly absurd standard, because what it qualifies as a rip-off is so ridiculously broad. It basically makes Andromeda itself a rip-off of other Roddenberry works. For example, in the 1970s, Roddenberry made a pilot for a show called Genesis 2. Now, Genesis 2 follows a character also called Dylan Hunt, who's a NASA scientist and he's experimenting with suspended animation. While in suspended animation, things go wrong, of course, and he wakes up over a century into the future, and it's a post-apocalyptic world, and his job is to join with a ragtag group and fight to make things better. He also made Planet Earth later, which was another pilot for another show, and it has basically the exact same premise for Genesis 2. This time it just had John Saxon and it was more action-heavy. So Andromeda was actually the third time Roddenberry used the general idea of a time-displaced person or persons waking up in a dark world and fighting to put things right. Even so, this general premise was also used for Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which was a TV show in the 80s. Which itself was a loose adaptation from a story from 1928, Armageddon 2149, which was the first appearance of the character Buck Rogers. Now, you may think this doesn't really help my case here, it simply brings up more shows and pilots etc. which Discovery apparently ripped off. But it actually shows that this general story idea was already in circulation with many writers long before Andromeda even got made. And if you accuse Discovery of ripping off Andromeda, then by that same logic and by that same standard, Andromeda also ripped off a bunch of other things. But again, this definition of what constitutes a rip-off is so broad you could accuse Andromeda of ripping off Star Trek itself. Just swap the Andromeda with the Enterprise, the Commonwealth with the Federation, Dylan Hunt with Kirk, etc. But then there's Star Trek itself. People like to think it's this totally original idea, and while it was quite original for TV at the time, it certainly wasn't for the sci-fi genre. You could easily call Star Trek a rip-off of the film Forbidden Planet, but then again, Forbidden Planet was loosely based on William Shakespeare's The Tempest. However, William Shakespeare based a bunch of his plays on older Greek tragedies. And if you want to talk about how often Greek tragedies ripped each other off, there's a really good book by a guy called Joseph Campbell you should read. You could do the same thing with the accusation that Star Trek Picard ripped off Mass Effect because of the robot space tentacles, but that ignores both properties are, quote-unquote, ripping off H.P. Lovecraft and his Cthulhu mythos. Nothing is original, every story, every piece of art is inspired by something which came before it. That's just how new work kind of gets made. Star Wars is Flash Gordon meets the Hidden Fortress, and many of Akira Kurosawa's movies were inspired by John Ford westerns, yet westerns often ended up ripping off Kurosawa's samurai films, etc, etc. Point is, even if the creative team behind Discovery were directly inspired by Andromeda, that doesn't make the same general premise any less unworthy of being a Star Trek story idea. It's all about context. The idea of the Federation collapsing has a much different impact in the context of the Star Trek franchise than the Commonwealth falling in Andromeda and vice versa. But what's truly baffling is the people who often make this criticism are the same people who also love The Orville, which is literally just Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek fanfiction. But that's fine, I really like The Orville. This accusation of unoriginality just isn't productive or interesting because that's just how new stories are made. Now that's not to say ripoffs don't exist, of course they do. Just look at the smattering of movies which copied the Star Wars aesthetic after its release, or the movies which copied elements of The Matrix after that came out. But that's not what's happening with Discovery Season 3. It's not how Andromeda itself got made, and it's not what all the other major franchises I've mentioned did. So many iconic and often cited original movies literally just took images, designs, characters, or even entire plots from other things and smashed them together to make something new. Everyone knows The Wrath of Khan took heavy inspiration from the Horatio Hornblower books, but then there's the Honor Harrington series, which is almost literally Hornblower in space. Then there's The Expanse and its realistic sci-fi setting, which owes a lot to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and 2001 itself being inspired by Destination Moon and conceived as how the West was won but in space, and I can go on for hours about this. Now, with these videos, I often get complaints about why I complain about other people's complaints so much, and the reason is because I really love talking about all this stuff, and especially with Star Trek, which is why I dislike when what could be genuinely fascinating conversations get bogged down in boring, unproductive topics. You can call Discovery Season 3 a rip-off of Andromeda all you like, but so what? What's there to talk about in that topic? Isn't the point of fan discussion and fan debate to enrich ourselves with differing points of view, to see the media we love in new ways? I don't see that happening in a discussion with one side throwing the word rip-off around in the broadest possible sense. I enjoy modern Star Trek, but if you're a person who hates it, at least be interesting in your reasons as to why you hate it. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.